The sky was low and orange when I turned off the gravel road into my own ranch. Dust curled around the tires, my boots hit the dirt, and before I could even close the gate behind me, a siren howled in the distance. She'd really called them. Again. Subscribe. Before I tell you how that single call ended her HOA forever, stay with me because when federal law steps in, even Karens go quiet. Later that morning, just as the mist was lifting off the lake surface, I arrived at the old cabin, my property. I'd spent months away working a federal rotation across state lines, and this was the first time I'd returned to check on the land. The gate was just as I left it, locked, chained, and posted with a legal boundary notice. I parked the truck beside the tree line and took a slow walk around the perimeter. Felt good to be back. The quiet, the pine air, the way gravel shifted under my boots, it was all mine. Or at least it used to be peaceful. 5 minutes after I walked up the trail to check the dock, a silver SUV rolled into view like it owned the place. Out stepped the woman I had only heard about in voicemail threats, the new HOA president. A red clipboard in one hand, sunglasses sharp enough to cut glass in the other. She didn't wave, didn't greet, just marched toward me like a manager checking employee hours. "You're trespassing," she said. I stayed silent and let the wind fill the space between us. The lake rippled behind her like it knew the confrontation had begun. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. I handed her the paperwork I always kept in my truck, the land title deed and a federal use clearance from my department. She didn't even read it. She called it fake and said her HOA board had claimed this waterway 3 months ago under a recreational easement. I asked one question: "Did you register that with the county clerk?" Her eyes flinched just for a second, the first crack in her armor. She looked back at her clipboard, then turned and walked away. An hour later, while I was unlocking the equipment shed, I heard it, the distant whine of sirens. I already knew who had called. I leaned against the wall and waited. The officer who arrived was polite, local, and obviously uncomfortable. "We got a report of someone breaking into the lakeside house," he said, eyes scanning my truck plates. I opened my wallet slowly and handed over the one badge that didn't belong to the county. The moment he saw the seal, everything changed. I didn't press charges. I just asked the officer to document the false report and log the encounter for internal follow-up. The HOA lady was still across the road, pacing, yelling into her phone like she was orchestrating a SWAT raid. She hadn't seen the badge exchange, and that ignorance gave her one final illusion of control. I wasn't going to shatter it, not yet. Sometimes letting someone step deeper into their own delusion is the cleanest way to let the truth break them. By evening, I had a few neighbors stop by quietly. No one said much, but their eyes said enough. They knew something was wrong. They'd seen the HOA overstep before, but never like this. One man just nodded and left a folded piece of paper on my porch, a copy of a petition. 23 signatures. A motion to dissolve the HOA entirely. They didn't need my help. They just needed a reason. And now they had one. That night I sat by the fire pit, flipping through the local ordinance codes and county filings. She hadn't registered her lake claim. She hadn't even filed it. Worse, she had installed signs and collected fines based on a claim that never legally existed. I documented everything. Screenshots, phone records, timestamps, witness notes, the whole trail. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was building a report. Because this wasn't just neighborhood nonsense anymore. This was federal interference. I sent the packet the next morning. Not to the HOA board. Not to the police. To my agency's compliance liaison. Title misuse, fraudulent fines, false emergency call. It met more than one criteria for external review. And I knew from experience, when these things land on the right desk, people move. Not because they care, but because they don't want it to land in court. By noon, the sheriff's department had called me back. Not to question me, but to apologize. "We didn't know this was under jurisdictional dispute," he said. I told him it wasn't. "There is no dispute," I said. "There's only a lie, and a line she wasn't supposed to cross." But by then it was too late for her. The next day started deceptively quiet. Sunrise cracked golden through the cedar trees, and a soft breeze rolled off the lake. I walked down to the dock, sipping black coffee from an old enamel mug, trying to center myself. But calm doesn't last long when someone like her feels power slipping through their fingers. Around 9 a.m., a notice appeared nailed to my gate, in bold red letters stamped with the HOA logo, declaring violation, unauthorized use of restricted common area. She wasn't just doubling down, she was declaring war. The paper shook slightly in my hand, not from fear, from disbelief. How far would she go? My boots crunched dry gravel as I walked back up the trail, heart thudding not from panic but rising clarity. She didn't care about the law. She cared about control. I thought of the neighbors, the quiet ones who'd signed that petition. If she'd done this to me with federal credentials and legal land rights, what had she done to them? By noon I started getting messages, screenshots, voice memos, HOA group emails that sounded more like political campaigns. She accused me of intimidating officials, trespassing, even endangering water access. It wasn't just fiction, it was slander. But hidden in her words was panic. She was scrambling. She knew the investigation had begun, even if she didn't know where it would land. And I didn't need to defend myself. I just kept documenting. That evening, 2 unmarked cars showed up. I knew the plates, internal affairs, not locals. They weren't here to arrest anyone. They were here to verify. I showed them everything: photos, timestamps, recordings, neighbor testimonies. They said little, asked less. But one of them took a picture of the HOA notice and simply muttered, "Unauthorized enforcement." That's enough. Then they left, not with a bang but with silence. And I knew what that meant. At dusk, I noticed her SUV parked across the lake. Not on HOA land, on county public access. She was watching. Probably waiting for some sign of surrender. But I didn't give her one. I went about my evening like it was any other day. Turned on the shed lights. Cooked dinner over a wood stove. Sat under the string lights I'd hung years ago before she ever imagined claiming this land. It was my silent answer: I'm still here. The phone rang that night. It wasn't my agency, it was the county clerk's office. A woman with a tired voice said, "We just had a group of residents come in to file a request. They say your name should be added to the land utility designation as primary stakeholder. Want to confirm that?" I smiled into the dark and said yes. She continued, "Also, this HOA didn't file a federal access waiver before collecting water fees. That's going to be reviewed." I thanked her, knowing full well what that meant. But the real moment came at dawn the next morning. A printed memo was left in my mailbox. Not by her. By the HOA vice president, anonymously. It read, "We didn't know she was falsifying board votes. We're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow. We'll fix this. Please stay." I read it twice, then burned it in the fire pit. I didn't need apologies. I needed the system that gave her power to disappear. And it was starting to. By the time the sun crested over the tree line, her world had already begun to crack. She just didn't know it yet. I stood by the dock, the early fog rolling across the water like low-hanging smoke. From the distance, I could see HOA Karen pacing across her porch in a bathrobe, phone glued to her ear, her gestures sharp and frantic. My guess? Damage control. But this time, no lie was going to save her. Around 10 a.m., I received the formal summons. My agency had scheduled a land review meeting. Not an investigation against me, but a federal consultation regarding misuse of civilian HOA governance over federally integrated infrastructure. The language was cold, precise, devastating. I knew then that the scope had expanded. They weren't just looking at her. They were looking at the entire HOA charter. And that meant one thing: collapse was on the table. As the morning stretched into noon, the street changed. Neighbors who had long kept their heads down started walking in pairs. I saw the couple from Lot 9 whispering with the man from Lot 3. I saw a teenage girl pulling out a Stop HOA Extortion sign from her garage. Quiet resistance was evolving into something louder. Something that would echo. And still, she remained in denial, until the white government SUV pulled up to her door. 2 federal compliance officers stepped out. No lights, no drama, just paperwork and purpose. One held a file 3 inches thick, clipped with red tags and stickers. I recognized it instantly, a full property audit dossier. They didn't even knock. They waited on the porch until she opened the door. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the moment it landed. Her shoulders dropped. Her mouth opened, shut, opened again. Then stillness. 10 minutes later, the agents were in my yard. One of them, a quiet man with glasses, asked for my badge. I showed it. He nodded once and said, "Thank you for your cooperation. We're moving to dissolve oversight." That was the word. Dissolve. Not reform. Not adjust. Dissolve. Everything she'd built, every restriction, every fine, every power play, would be voided. And she knew it. Back inside, I reviewed the timeline. My evidence folders. Audio clips. HOA fee receipts that didn't align with budget reports. Copies of emails where her votes were submitted under board members who no longer lived in the community. It was all airtight. But the most damning piece? A document buried in the county archive proving the lake's access road had never been transferred to the HOA. She'd based her entire empire on a lie. That evening, a small crowd gathered by the trailhead. Candles. Quiet talking. Someone brought coffee. It wasn't a protest. It was a vigil for a neighborhood long silenced. And when one of the neighbors stood up and read from the compliance letter, the part that clearly stated, federal access routes may not be governed by unrecognized private entities, a soft cheer rose from the crowd. Not wild. Not angry. Just relief. As night fell, I saw her porch go dark for the first time in weeks. No porch light. No late-night HOA patrols. Just stillness. That silence was louder than any confrontation. She wasn't gone yet. But the leash had snapped. And she knew it. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just sat by the fire, sipping the same black coffee I had the day I arrived. The kind that stays bitter no matter how long you let it sit. It reminded me that some fights don't need fists, just the truth backed by law and time. Because sometimes karma wears a badge. The next morning I woke early. Not out of fear but habit. Federal cases move quietly but they don't sleep. I stepped outside with my thermos, wind brushing the field grass like a whisper. The old ranch gate creaked open on its own, and for once no one stood there with a clipboard or citation. Just clean air. Stillness. At 9:12 a.m., a county courier parked beside the old oak near the lake and handed me a thick envelope. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a signed cease and desist against the HOA's unauthorized regulatory practices. The second was a formal withdrawal of HOA authority over any land intersecting federal jurisdiction, including roads, trails, and water access. But the third, that was the hammer. It was a court-issued order to dissolve the HOA. Not revise. Not restructure. Terminate. Permanently. Word spread in hours. People came out of their houses like spring was returning after a long frost. An elderly woman I'd never seen before offered me pie. A teenage boy gave me a nod like I was some kind of legend. But I wasn't. I was just a man who didn't back down when the truth was on my side, and had the credentials to push it over the finish line. Karen meanwhile stayed inside. Her front yard signs were gone. Her mailbox stood bare. No more bulletins. No more threats. The woman who once walked our neighborhood like a self-declared sheriff was now just another name on a former board. Her power? Gone with one flash of a badge and a trail of paperwork she never thought would be read by the right people. That evening we had a small bonfire. No speeches. No politics. Just neighbors. Real ones. Laughing again. Sharing stories that didn't end in fines or threats. I stood by the flames, silent. Watching. Listening. Remembering how much weight small things carry when power goes unchecked, and how quickly that weight can collapse under the force of law. Somewhere in the distance I could hear frogs by the lake again. They'd gone silent during her reign, scared off by chemicals and shoreline barriers. But now, they were back. Nature was louder. So were we. I turned once more to that long road leading out of our community, past the faded HOA sign that would be taken down the next day. I whispered quietly, not to her, but to the space where her false authority once stood. You picked the wrong badge to test. And with that I walked back inside. No gate. No code. Just home.